Yes. New politics and civil society in Ukraine. This is a very interesting subject, and I think we've heard a lot from our previous speakers that there really is no going back for Ukraine. That I think it was Irena Bekeshkina said that the eastern vector is now no longer a reality for Ukraine. So I wanted to actually examine the title, New Politics, Civil Society in Ukraine. What does this actually mean? How far can Ukraine's experience be seen as perhaps a model for other countries who are going through similar processes? And also, I'm posing more questions than I have answers for, but hopefully the conference will give us some of these answers. I also would like to pose the question, what have the events in Ukraine taught us about civil society? What role does it play? How far was what happened here new? And always looking back at the last 2 years, I always think that I have this phrase in my head, what goes on in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Any of you who know anything about the United States will sort of appreciate that phrase, but you can turn it around and say, what happens in Ukraine actually never stays in Ukraine. Looking over the last 20 or so years, when there were demonstrations and the beginnings of civil society in Ukraine. I'm thinking particularly about the student groups in 1990, when they had what was called the Revolution on the Granite. That was 1990. By the following year, the Soviet Union had dissolved, and the repercussions of that spread all around the world. In 2005, you had the Orange Revolution, and I would argue that that actually provided inspiration for a lot of citizens' protest movements around the world, for better or for worse. Some of them were successful, some of them were not. And in fact, I think probably we had more unsuccessful movements than we had successes. But again, what happened in Ukraine did not stay in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians earned that, or developed that phrase, color revolution, which seems to have stuck and has been used in a positive way and also in a negative way ever since. So I'd like to take a look at what happened in the Maidan, civil society and new politics. What was the effect on politics? Secondly, what is the effect on government, and what's the significance for a sort of newly revived society in terms of civil society and government? And lastly, I have a note, civil society and national identity. But first, a little bit about the Maidan. How is this different from other protests? In fact, I would not so much call it a protest, because it lasted for so long. If you think back, the Orange Revolution was basically 17 days. The Maidan lasted for over 100 days. And what it became fairly quickly was not so much a recognizable protest as actually the organization of a kind of state within a state. Because there were barricades around the Maidan, this kept the authorities out. And what was happening inside the Maidan was a sort of starting form of self-organizing society. I was there the first week, and I saw the beginnings of a university, a newspaper, a sort of reorganization of religious life. And this was just so very different from what happened in 2005. And actually, I would argue, and maybe ask Krzysztof to comment, that in fact what happened on the Maidan bears the closest resemblance really to what happened during the Solidarity period in Poland, which actually took the Solidarity movement about 7 or 8 years to accomplish, creating a kind of alternative alternative space, alternative life, alternative internal structures for the movement and the people who belonged. It took, because Solidarity was doing this within a communist state, it took rather longer. On the Maidan, everything was accelerated, and of course social media helps to accelerate everything as well. It happened within 100 days. And ended up, unfortunately, in violence and war, which again makes it a little different from Poland. And again, someone here mentioned the culture of the Maidan. I think, again, this is something that has endured, and I think, I hope that over the next couple of days there will be a lot more discussions as to how the spirit of the Maidan, the culture of the Maidan, really can find some institutional roots in Ukrainian society. But turning to politics, though, new politics and civil society, what is that? Yevhen Bystritsky here earlier mentioned that there are now civil society activists joining politics, and I think that's a very good trend, because I would argue that up until now, for the last 23 years, Ukraine has really not had political parties in the sense that the Western world understands them. Unfortunately, the Soviet system, kind of totalitarianism, soft authoritarianism, a very centralized system collapsed before it was possible to have authentic political parties that actually represented citizens and represented people could emerge. So for the last 23 years, I would argue we've had political party-like structures in Ukraine without them really, and they've been operating in a quasi-political party way, but without really representing people. Political parties really couldn't develop here in the way that, political scientists will look back to the 19th century and explain how, the middle class gives rise to interests and entrepreneurial forces then create political parties that win rights and responsibilities. There hasn't been time to do that in Ukraine. So it seems like the most logical thing that civil society is providing now people to go into political parties. And I know how difficult this was for some of the civic activists who have really grown up with an idea that politics is somehow a dirty business, that they shouldn't participate in it, somehow wanting to keep their hands clean. But I think those of us who are watching these processes very carefully over the last year or so, we're very pleased to see that a group of younger people, and also some, it's not necessarily connected to age, but that a new wave of people have gone into the parliament, keeping civil society, their civil society values with them, and some of them were investigative journalists as well, and have brought that to the parliament, which I think is the logical next step in how politics should develop. Will develop in Ukraine, and I think we're all very pleased to see that. And just a note about why it is logical that civil society should be providing new politicians. Civil society, after all, is the best training ground for helping to develop leadership, for helping to get people to be able to form coalitions, to form consensus. This is the kind of work that goes on in civic groups all the time. So it's very natural that civil society people should go into politics, and we'll see in the municipal elections in the autumn as to how many more will go in on a local level. Just a note about these newly emerging political parties. There is a little bit of a downside of when political parties become democratic and start to run really in democratic elections, that it really does open the door for populism. And we've seen this happening in Western Europe, and I hope that it really, that the civil society people who've gone into politics will prevent that happening here in Ukraine. Just a couple of words about government. New politics hopefully will also produce better government in Ukraine. We see already that the way that civil society operated over the last 20 years, it really has, in a sense, substituted for government in many cases. Civic groups have turned into service providers where the state has not been a service provider or has done it poorly. And we've seen recently as well that civic groups have been very active in drafting laws. The reanimation package of reforms, which I'm sure we'll hear more about, has been taking on that role. But also, I would like to remind the civil society people who've been playing these roles up until now that there is always a danger of civil society becoming a parallel structure to government, and I think that's not something that anyone wants to see. And also, civic groups can become strong lobbyists for interests that may not, in the end, be good for society as a whole. The third point that I had, civil society and national identity. This is a huge subject that I hope will be discussed in the next few days. I see great changes here I've been coming to Ukraine for the last 20 years or so, and what's happened over the last couple of years has really surprised even me in terms of the slow emergence of a new sense of identity, a new sense of national consciousness, which at some points in the last 10 years, even I was not really sure what would happen here. It's come as a result of what happened on the Maidan, the culture of the Maidan, the spirit of the Maidan. But unfortunately as well, I would like to say that, this is the Maidan nation, that this is the new Ukraine. But unfortunately, I think actually the war has played probably an even greater role in uniting Ukraine. So something actually to thank President Putin for, in a strange sense. But the emergence of all of these volunteer groups that have been referred to here today, this new wave of civic activism, the new sense of responsibility, the new sense of people connecting to each other to achieve something and actually to work on concrete things like providing food and supplies to soldiers, providing help for IDPs. That has united the society, as far as I can see, in a way that it never has before. It's unfortunate that it's taken something like this to do it, but at least that there is a result, and I will be curious to see where that goes for in the future. Of course, new politics will bring new challenges. I hope that over the next couple of days we can talk more about the challenges for Ukraine, the information war that is being focused on Ukraine and also spilling over to Western Europe. I hope that we'll also talk a little bit about the actual effect of militarization of a society. I'm not feeling well informed enough at the moment to say anything about that. But maybe just finish on a positive note and ask, well, where is all of this leading? As a one-time historian, I used to be a historian, I studied some of the works of Mykola Kostomarov, who wrote in the 19th century. And at that time, he pointed to Ukraine as the potential source of a revival of what then was a sort of Slavic commonwealth. He said that Ukraine would become the cornerstone of a new polity, a place that would be better for its people to live. Well, maybe I can turn that on its head a little bit and say that I hope that a renewed and revived Ukraine can also be something of an example for Europe. I know that when people were looking at the Maidan, they said, Ukrainians said, well, when we first came to the Maidan, we were actually looking for Europe, looking for European values, support from Europe. But what we found there actually was Ukraine. Hopefully, when Western Europeans and people from the United States now come to Ukraine, hopefully they will rediscover some of the values, that Western societies have been built on, and hopefully we will be able to revive our own values and together with that help Ukraine at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Although I'm very much looking forward to what Hanna Hopko has maybe to reply to Nadia, looking maybe on the same things from inside. The next on our list is Krzysztof Stanowski from the Solidarity Fund in Warsaw. And please, Krzysztof.
Дякую. Я попробую говорити по-українськи. Це для мене не батьківська, не материнська мова, це просто мова сусідів. І ми взагалі в гостях. І треба це пам'ятати, що як люди з Сполучених Штатів, з Польщі приїжджають тут, вони приїжджають якби в гостях, і ми не можемо говорити, що треба робити. Ми можемо сказати різні коментарі. Мої коментарі з цього, що я працюю біля 25-20 років з партнерами в Криму, в Галичині, в інших частинах України, що, так як багато інших поляків, ми підтримуємо Майдан. Ми самі допомагали раненим, перевозили їх до лікарні у Польщі. Також Фонд Солідарності допомагав медії, спеціально медії на провінції. І на кінець, сьогодні ми разом з партнерами з Канади підтримуємо реформу місцевого самоврядування, децентралізацію в Україні. І нам здається, що це є дуже важлива реформа. Це будуть якби коментарі україно-ентузіаста, який бачив те, що зміняється. В час Майдану я мав честь говорити з майданцями про майбутні реформи. Я не виступав на сцені. Ми разом сіли в Могилянки і ми говорили, які реформи необхідні для України. І в цей час, якби влада стріляла в людей, ми разом думали, що необхідно. Що необхідно зробити на наступний день? Як нам треба готуватися, щоб бути готовим на наступний день після зміни? Тому що тепер є ситуація така, яка є. Майдан – це не спосіб життя українців. Вони взагалі не планували жити в палатках на площі. Вони хотіли змінити країну. І це було саме важливе. Як я питав, який є самий страшний варіант для вас, в цей момент вони не відповідали війна, вони говорили оранжева революція. Страшний варіант – це, що будуть нові твари, що побачимо нових лідерів і не буде реальних змін. Це то, як вони бачили в цей час оранжеву революцію. І не думаю про війну, вони розуміли, що це не є дуже добрий варіант. В час Майдану це було дуже видно, що громадянське суспільство, воно змогло вирішити різні проблеми. Починає з технічних проблем. Якби організувати такий Майдан, я сам харцер, я сам пластун, я це розумію, зимою на 3 місяці на 100 тисяч людей, це для британської армії також, це не є легко. І українці це змогли зробити. Це питання медичної допомоги, яке було професійно зроблено. Це був успіх. Це питання медій. Поляки, вони думають про себе, що вони професіонали в саміздатах, що вони професіонали якби, в праці в нелегальних медіях. Ми побачили, що це абсолютно можна зробити краще, як то, що ми думали. Це на кінець, вже після Майдану, це батальйони. Це молоді люди, які готові були просто вийти на війну, щоб захищати свою родину. Це безумовно, якби це є огромний результат Майдану. Громадянське суспільство. Не думаю, що треба тут говорити про громадські організації. Не думаю. Не думаю, що think-танки це спланували, не до кінця. Це було зроблено громадянським суспільством. І ми побачили нових лідерів. Для нас у Польщі таким дуже важливим зауваженням, то, що ми побачили релігійних лідерів з людьми. Для нас це було дуже важливо. Що лідери греко-католицької церкви і другі були з людьми в цей час. Що можна було організувати лікарню, як треба, в церкві, що можна було переночувати, дати ночліг в церкві. Що то, що було зроблено на Майдані, було зроблено волонтерами, людьми з бізнесу, студентами, що це реально було зроблено. Що вартує вивчити з других країн, які це проходили. Надя говорила про Польщу, яка це була зміна в 80-й рік, 81-й рік і пізніше. Перший, якби, урок, який відноситься до Польщі, до Словакії, до Естонії, це те, що реформи треба робити швидко. Перша реформа в Польщі, сама важлива, це була реформа Бальцеровича, економічна реформа. І вона була зроблена 90 днів після формування першого уряду. 90 днів. Пакет 15 законів. Складніше було з реформою місцевого самоврядування. Тому що це питання власності державної, власності муніципальної. І ця реформа, цей пакет законів, він був прийнят 180 днів після формування першого уряду. І ми думаємо, що самим важливим, що це було зроблено в цей час. Тому що ми говорили про цю реформу. У нас не було мрії, що це реально. Але ми говорили про цю реформу, ми планували реформи. Я сам брав участь в думках про реформу освіти в в'язницях. Не в парламентах, не в бібліотеках, просто в в'язницях. Ми говорили, що нам треба зробити. І, чесно кажучи, як ми бачимо сьогодні на Україну, і то, що було рік тому, експертиза в Україні є. Чесно кажучи, вам не треба експертів. З Польщі, з Грузії, зі Словаччини ми готові допомагати. Вони є. Польський президент прислав цих експертів тиждень після, якби,